All right.
So how you been? You been busy?
Oh, I've been really busy. Yeah, things have been busy. We're going to Ireland next week, so going to be out of commission for about 10 days.
It wasn't that long you were in Europe, wasn't it? Just a couple months ago? Oh wow. That's right. Couple of months. 5.
So I'm going up there for that, and then he and I are going to relatives up in Michigan from there.
Awesome. Starting to get people in the chat. Brian, thank you for coming in. Andrea, member. Good to see you guys. We're going to start here in just a second. We have not started yet. Scott Gilliland, probably out shooting fluid shots around Western Oklahoma. Jill, my moderator's here.
Now, what does Jill do? How does she moderate us?
She doesn't moderate us. She moderates the chat. She keeps the trolls.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see the chat?
Yeah, I can see it.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. Hi, sarcastic sister. Welcome back. Karen Wu, thank you for joining us today. We've not started yet. I'm giving you all a chance to come in. I get a lot of Canadians in here, Robert.
Yeah.
Canadians love me. Ever since all this stuff started with Donald Trump in Canada, man, you look at my comment section and it's just Canadian flags everywhere.
Well, it's funny because I posted just a few days ago. I said, for the record, I love Canada and I love Canadians. I've been up there. I think it's crazy that we are rattling.
Yeah. Welcome, Gumps. You saw Mark Cuban talking about me? Yeah, he does that occasionally. Sometimes I got to message him and say, "Hey, why don't you share something so I can get out of being shadow banned?" Really?
To me looking into this company that was claiming to make cellulosic ethanol. And I said, that's complete garbage. I said, they can't do what they say they're doing. They're not doing what they say they're doing. And it turned out that journalist worked for Cuban. And I didn't find that out until later because the journalist went back and he told Cuban, this guy says it's garbage. Cuban shorted the company. The company went bankrupt. He made $100,000 in just a couple of days. And then Cuban messaged me and he said, anytime you're in town, anytime you want Mavericks tickets, let me know.
Wow. So last year, Mark Cuban started sharing a lot of my content on X. And
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that.
yeah, and
He's a good guy, by the way. I
he
think he's a
really
good
is.
guy. People talk about billionaires, how terrible they are. And it's true a lot of times, but I think Cuban is a good guy.
No, he is a good guy. And once a month or every couple of months, we'll kind of message each other on some platform and. But yeah, I would love to have him on here. I'm trying to figure out how to go about asking him.
Well, I've got his email address. It's probably, I bet it's not good anymore. I bet after 10 years, his email address isn't good anymore. But I had his personal email address.
Oh man. All right, Robert. Well, I think we got enough people in here. We're ready to go. So here's the thing. Just for the people in the chat that may not be super familiar with who you are, even though I've told them, why don't you give us a little background and then we'll start.
All right. So I'm Robert Rapier. I was born and raised in southeastern Oklahoma. Um, I after I never had any plans to go to college, but my teachers were always saying you need to go to college. I was actually going to be a butcher, and in high school that was my plan, or to work on the family farm. And I went to work at Campbell Soup in Paris, Texas, and I started taking classes some during the day. And I eventually went all the way to, I got chemistry and math bachelor's degrees. I went to Texas A&M to get a PhD in chemistry, and about halfway through, I switched to chemical engineering, and that was made all the difference. I think. I've worked in Texas, I've worked overseas 3 times, I've worked in Oklahoma and Montana. I worked in the oil industry for many years, upstream and downstream. I started writing about the oil industry in about 2004. That sort of mainstream started to pick up on that. I started getting calls. I got interviewed by the New York Times like very early on. I got featured in Salon magazine. I like to tell people I'm on the cover of Rolling Stone. There is an article with Guns N' Roses, my all-time favorite band, Guns N' Roses, and there's a story down there that says the ethanol myth or something like that. And I'm quoted. I was interviewed for that story. So that that turned into a lot of stuff. Forbes has asked me to contribute over the years. I write for Investing Daily. I'm an investor since high school. I figured out a long time ago the way to get wealthy was a long period of time and compounding would make me wealthy. So I grew up pretty poor in southeastern Oklahoma, and over time you just keep plugging away. And people tell me I can't save any money, and I said, believe me, I've eaten grits, 5 days a week. I know how to dig deep and to save money, and if their will is there, you can do it.
Yeah, and one thing, it took me a while to learn, but you can start with a very small amount of money. Like over time, it will take time to accumulate, but you don't have to be putting back huge amounts of money. Just start with what you can afford and just keep
and,
and
and, and start early. The most important thing, I tell people, what is the most important thing? Start early. Start as early as possible. I started when I was 17. I started putting money away in high school. It was one of
wow.
those epiphanies in ninth grade algebra. Our teacher showed us compounding. And I remember in that moment, I had 4 grandparents that retired on Social Security. That's all they had. And my parents, my mom was a secretary, my dad was a mechanic and a farmer, and nobody ever had any money. And in that moment in ninth grade algebra, I just thought, I'm going to be wealthy someday. I am going to grow my wealth because I have the next 40 or 50 years in front of me as long as I stay the course. And that's what I did. I just consistently put money away. So, people know me for energy, but I write several columns for Investing Daily and a lot of personal finance columns, just trying to help people out. And, here are the issues. Here's what's coming up in tax time. Here's, the things you need to do. And that's generally what I'm doing, just trying to help people out with their finances.
Yeah. All right, Robert. Um, if you put all of the misinformation about the oil and gas industry in 2 sentences, it wouldn't make any sense because apparently, even though the United States is the number one producer of oil in the world and Canada is the number four producer of oil in the world, we also export more natural gas than any country in the world. Apparently, we can't refine our oil. They can't refine their oil. We can only refine their oil. They can't refine our oil. Like, apparently none of us it never occurred to any of us that we might need to refine that oil.
This this the stupidity around the energy sector is astounding, and it knows no bounds. I mean, I saw a meme on Facebook this morning, been shared tens of thousands of times, and it said, "As soon as we start drilling for ourselves, be prepared for gasoline to go below $2 a gallon." And I just looked at that and I thought, I don't engage, just don't engage. But there's so many people that think, oh, so we're going to start producing our own oil now, and finally our gasoline prices are going to come down to $2 a gallon.
Yeah.
And it's insane. I mean, I think the biggest misconception of all is that the president has very much to do with gas prices or oil production. I mean, they just don't. Um, Maybe very minuscule. I mean, Biden did have an impact when he released all that oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. He helped blunt the steep rise in prices. But outside of that, there's not a lot a president can do in the short term to really affect it. I mean, he could say drill, baby, drill, and the oil companies are going to say, wait a second, what do we think oil prices are going to be? I mean, that's what it comes down to. That's all. They're not
Yeah.
taking directions from the president.
Yeah, that's not a thing. And so as you can probably imagine, because when you see those Facebook memes, you're like, "Don't engage," and when I see them, I'm like, "I'm engaging the hell out of this," like because the misinformation drives me crazy. So the tariffs. How do you think? And I've been reminding people throughout we went through all this in the Trump's first administration. This is the exact same playbook he had
Right.
in his first administration. We had tariffs on Canada in 2017. For whatever reason, it wasn't as big of a news story as it is now. The media is hyping it up a lot more. So let's say, and I don't even really think it's going to happen. If it does, it's short term. Let's say it does happen. Let's say 10% tariffs on oil and natural gas. What real impact does that have on gas prices in the United States? Because I don't think it's that significant. What do you think?
Well, so let's take a step back and educate people on tariffs. Why are we wanting to put tariffs on Canada? Because we have a trade deficit with Canada. Why is that a problem? You know who I have a big trade deficit with? My grocery store. They take my money, I take their goods. I've got a big trade deficit with them. It's
Yeah.
not a problem because I have the money. So if you are trading money for goods, as long as you're fully employed or close to fully employed, what difference does that make? Your people are making money and you're selling other things, and it doesn't matter if you have a trade deficit with someone. That's not a thing. It's not an issue. It could become an issue if you've exported some of your critical industries and suddenly we're dependent on Canada for food. We don't want to be dependent on Canada for food. We don't want to be dependent on anybody for food. So if that's a situation, then maybe tariffs might make sense if you need to protect certain industries that are national security critical. But otherwise, it doesn't matter if Canada sends us more goods and we send them cash. What is the problem there? We have full employment, nearly full employment. It's not an issue. So that's the one thing. So we're rattling sabers and we are threatening our closest ally and trading partners, and that's insane to me. Um, and it will. I mean, contrary to what President Trump says, the consumers are who pays for it. I mean, that is ultimately who pays for it. If we put a tariff on Canadian oil, gas prices are going to go up. There's no way around that. They may not go up a lot because, frankly, we take that oil from Canada, mostly refine the heavy stuff, and then ship out the finished products. That's what happens. We are not dependent on Canada for crude. Our refiners like the economics there. The question you alluded to earlier about can we refine our own oil? Of course, we can refine our own oil. We generally choose not to because heavy Canadian sour oil trades at a steep discount. And for the last 40 or 50 years, our refineries have been investing in being able to process that crude. So suddenly, shale oil is lighter and sweeter. Yes, we can run that through the refinery, but they're not making use of all those billions of dollars of investments that they've made on being able to process the heavy sour, and they're paying a premium for the light sweet. So better to keep taking that Canadian heavy sour and continue to convert that into finished products, ship those out, take a deep discount, bring it in, send it out. I mean, it's all about economics. And you said this the other day. You said Canadian trade is about greed, not need. That's exactly right. It's about making money. It's about the refiners. I worked in the economics and process group in Billings, Montana for ConocoPhillips, and every month I would see that we Montana or heavy sour from Canada. The economics were always no brainer. I mean,
Yeah, there's this notion out there that we import what we need, we export what we don't need. There's this notion that everything the oil and gas industry does is about meeting the people's needs. And when I try to tell them it has nothing to do with your needs and it has everything to do with their profits, it completely short circuits their brain. Um, and it's true though. People think, Well, if we're importing more oil, then that is somehow a failure by our government or our country in not producing enough.
Right.
No, importing oil is a business in itself that people make money doing, and that's why we do it. So you can't just look at imports and say, well, imports are up, we must be failing. No, importing is a business, exporting is a business. It's all a business, and it has nothing to do with your needs or what you want. It's about their needs and their needs for profit. Period.
So some people in the chat said my audio's cutting out. I told you before people joined that I had my Wi-Fi turned off. I if that's better.
Now you're back.
All right. Okay. So we'll see if that's better. All right. You hear me and see me okay?
Yep,
Okay.
we're good.
So I am on Wi-Fi now. I wasn't on Wi-Fi a while ago.
uh, so, yeah, I've been telling people that, if we implement these tariffs, we really won't see the rise in gas prices because it'll kind of be hidden in seasonal demand and swapping to summer blend because they're going to rise anyway. And what we'll see is, everyone will be pointing directly to the tariffs and say, oh, gas went up by 40 cents because of the tariffs. And I've been telling them most of that's going to be summer blend and seasonal demand, and it'll be kind of hidden in there. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So yeah, we're about to see gas prices go up. Gas prices go up 90% of the time between February and May. And the reason they go up is because we switch over to summer blends. And what are summer blends? Summer blends are blended with a lower vapor pressure, but to keep gas from evaporating faster in the summer. And so I wrote a Forbes article on this the other day because there's a lot of talk about giving waivers to allow winter blends in the summer. And the reason that the summer blends are a thing, if you recall, 70 smog in California, in LA, that is the sort of thing that the winter blends can cause in the summer. You got faster evaporation, you got ground level smog, and that's the reason. Will it make prices cheaper? Yes, it'll probably make prices cheaper. When you can put that butane in your summer blends, but it's going to evaporate off faster. So that's the issue. There's not a free lunch there.
Yeah, you'll pay for that. You may not pay for it at a price per gallon, but you're going to fill up more times over the summer.
Right.
So you won't see. You'll think you're saving money, but you're really not because you'll
Right.
be buying 3 extra tanks of gas this summer or something. Yeah, and another thing, there's 14 different blends. There's 14 different gasoline blends around the country. Refiners start producing summer blends in March and
Right.
April.
Right.
Uh, they have to be in the terminals by May the 1st.
Right. I used to be the person making those blends. I used to be
Yeah,
blending that gasoline, and we'd have to have the tanks cleared. Um, Generally, we're doing a turnaround right about now. So we're doing a turnaround in March, and we're trying to get the tanks clear, and we're trying to get the summer blends into the tanks, by the turnover season. And you'll usually see them. I mean, you have to. You'll start to see them actually hit the pumps before the deadline because
yeah.
at the deadline you start to get penalized if you haven't met the specs.
So Scott wants to know how does all that affect diesel?
Well, diesel is seasonal as well, but it's seasonal because farmers plant in the spring and they harvest in the fall. And so, what we would see, so a refinery can shift a little bit between diesel and gasoline. Our refinery in Billings, we could shift about 5% in either direction. And we would do that. In the spring, we'd shift toward more diesel. And in the winter and in the fall, we'd shift back to more diesel again. But in the summer, we'd shift to more gasoline. And one of the things that happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, that happened just as the shift toward diesel was happening. And one of the things we got from Russia was a lot of diesel and a lot of fuel, a lot of oils that made diesel. And suddenly we had a diesel shortage. So if you saw what happened then, and my refinery manager at ConocoPhillips, he told me they were scrambling. He was in California, one of the California refineries at the time, and he said they had tremendous problems then. They had diesel shortage, so they're shifting everything they can to diesel production, which caused a gasoline shortage, and that's why prices skyrocketed.
Yeah, yeah. We've had some trolls in the life. Johnny, nobody cares about your sexuality. That's we don't care. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I'm watching the trolls. I see we've got Canadians in there, and I've spent a lot of time in Edmonton. I've spent a lot of time in New Brunswick. I've spent time in St. John's. A lot of time. I mean, I probably spent 6 months of my life in Canada.
So, with all of this uh, saber rattling and all this stuff going on, now Canadians are having the conversations again about the West East pipeline. And of course, as soon as they start talking about that, Donald Trump wants the XL to come back, which I think he brought that up because they were talking about something that had nothing to do with him, and he just wanted to take over that conversation. Um, and then, in addition, the Constitution pipeline. I don't know if you've been keeping up with that. The Constitution pipeline was a pipeline that was set to be built from Northeast Pennsylvania up into the state of New York to ship gas, natural gas up there. Donald Trump is telling people that it will reduce their utility bills by 70%. Even though the gas that comes out of Canada down the Iroquois pipeline is actually cheaper than the gas that would go up. And the fact that pipelines don't, any savings incurred by pipelines aren't passed along to the customers. That is savings that the supplier gets, but those savings aren't passed on to you. So, what do you think about the XL? Southbow came out. They're the company that was spun off of TC
Right.
Energy. Said we're
Right.
not interested. Any possibility of that happening?
No, I don't think any possibility because I mean the U.S. energy policy is dysfunctional. I mean, when we can, those projects that take 10 or 15 years to complete, when we can change, you saw it play out with the Keystone XL. Obama threw down some barriers, and then Trump came in and tried to speed it up, and then Biden threw down barriers again, and then Trump again says, "Hey, let's get this going." And they're like, we've had enough. We've had enough of this. This is silly. Funny enough, I gave a talk in Canada at what's the university outside Toronto. I don't remember what the name of it was, but they were asking me about Canada's energy future, and I said, your biggest worry is our great big dysfunctional democracy just south of you. And I said, over time, I'm afraid that's going to cause you a lot of grief. And here we are. Um, that's what's happening. And I think Canada is going to say, look, we need to take matters into our own hands here and build some more pipelines, and because we don't know what the United States is going to do. This is completely unpredictable, and we need to strike out on our own and make some better partnerships with other people besides the United States.
Yeah.
Hey, somebody asked a question there. How do you detect the blend is different out of the pump? You can't, but your gas mileage will probably get better because butane has lower energy content. That's one thing people don't realize. In the winter, if you check your gas mileage in the winter versus in the summer, the winter blends have about 5 or 10% lower BTUs. So you are getting lower gas mileage in the winter, not just because the air is colder, but because it has fewer BTUs. So
Yeah.
check your
Yeah.
gas mileage. When your gas mileage goes up in the summer, you know you're on summer blend.
Exactly. Exactly. Someone asked earlier about OPEC Plus. Bloomberg reported the other day that they had agreed to lift some of their prior cuts. It's 138,000 barrel a day increase. I haven't seen OPEC Plus come out and say that. It's only been reported in the media. That is a very insignificant amount of oil. And then in addition to that, Donald Trump just revoked Chevron's license to import oil in the United States from Venezuela. So that would more than offset. I think we were importing about 230,000 barrels of oil a day from Venezuela. But, 138,000 barrels from OPEC, they can't keep their quotas within that tight of a margin.
Right,
To me, it means nothing.
right. Yeah, no, and I've always said if you want to understand what OPEC is doing, understand it from their perspective. Don't understand it from what's good for us, because they're not doing what's good for us. They're doing what's good for them. They're sitting on their oil reserves and they're trying to extract the maximum long-term value from their oil reserves. And if now you think about it from that perspective, you are in charge of OPEC and you are trying to maximize your revenue. You don't want to flood the market with oil. I mean, the reason they did it in 2014, 2015 was to try to put the shale producers out of business, but that was a long-term goal of putting those guys out of business. So now you're once again in charge of prices. They'd like prices at $100 a barrel. They'd love that for till the end of time. But they're not going to do something because Donald Trump wants them to do it, or because, unless they get something out of it. They will want something out of that benefits them.
Yeah, and even when we had the little crash in 2018, that was more Donald Trump instituting the waivers on Iran than it was, OPEC flooding the market. OPEC had increased production, and the Iran sanctions kicked in, and their exports fell off. But when those 6-month waivers just brought everything down, and I think that right there is a big reason why OPEC will be a lot less willing to work with Donald Trump, because he kind of screwed him over on that deal when he instituted those waivers.
Yeah.
A lot of our allied nations had gotten completely off of Iranian oil, like they didn't need it anymore, and the waivers, according to them, weren't needed. South Korea was like, "No, we quit buying that for first month." Japan, "No, we don't need the waivers." So that was kind of a stab in the back to OPEC.
Has my audio been okay since I switched to my Wi-Fi? Does it?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
yeah. Lori wants to know, why don't we fill our reserves before selling oil overseas? I can answer that. I'll let Robert answer that.
Well, I mean, so the whole reserves, this is a Democrat Republican thing. So Democrats will say, we don't need the same reserves we used to need, and this is money that's tied up, and we should sell these off and make money. And Republicans are going to come in and say we need to top this off, and it's not a matter of filling our reserves before putting some overseas. We fill and drain them over time while all the other stuff is going on in the background. You wouldn't stop exporting just to fill the reserves. I mean, that you do that in increments so as you don't upset the market.
Yeah, and when we export, we're exporting to overseas buyers. If we, filling up the reserve, that'd be the U.S. taxpayers paying for that. You would have a different buyer. The Department of Energy would come out with solicitation to purchase, however many barrels of oil at a time, probably once a month, maybe once a quarter. And I'm one of those people that I would like to see the SPR refilled, but I
Yeah,
also understand the purpose of it and the legal obligations of it, right? We're supposed to keep 90 days of oil, import protection in the
right.
reserve. That's our legal obligation. I think we're at 130, 140 days right now. But
So
the reason we don't need as much is because of how much we produce now. Like
that's correct.
when it was slap full, we didn't have 90 days of protection because we were only producing 8 million barrels a day. Now that we're at 13 and a half, we don't need as much.
Right, and we haven't had an issue really since the oil embargo of 73, 74. Um, but you have house insurance on your house in case it burns down, and it will probably never burn down. You probably never need that insurance. But if you do, you're going to look stupid for not having insurance. And that's the way I always view the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. We probably won't ever really, really need it. But if we do, and we don't have it, we're going to be in serious trouble. If we ever do get into a major armed conflict and our imports get cut off, you're right. We are producing enough now. We could probably rejigger and you have the refineries processing that light sweet oil. The economics wouldn't be very good, but we could. It would disrupt the heck out of the market for a while. I mean, it's like back to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. My former refinery manager said they were scrambling to try to fill holes in the refinery, but eventually they got it done and prices settled back down. But for a while, it was crazy high prices.
Yeah. And also, for the people that don't know, roughly half of the oil in the SPR is heavy and roughly half is light. So if we were going to fill it, we would use a lot of imports to fill it as well. It wouldn't be just U.S. oil refilling the SPR. Um, drill, baby, drill. Slogan of the day: we're going to drill, baby, drill in the Gulf of America, because changing the name of it changes everything, right? So I've been telling people that the Biden ban was, as far as the Gulf is concerned, was simply a continuation of the ban that Trump extended, which was an extension of the ban that Obama extended and Bush extended. At this point, I don't even remember who initially instituted that ban off the west coast of Florida, because
Right.
it's been going on forever. Um, just did the Joe Biden ban affect production in any way?
I
Is anything Donald Trump doing affecting that ban in any way?
I hammered this home in Forbes articles over and over again last year. Our oil and gas production were at all-time highs in 2023 and again in 2024. Our gas production may have been off a little bit. I don't think we have final numbers yet, but it was looking pretty flat toward the end of the year. But our oil production set another record. And people, when they say drill, baby, drill, I said, we're already producing more oil than any country in the history of the world. What are you expecting here? Oil companies don't drill because the president says drill. They drill because they look at the economics, they project. They don't have a crystal ball, but they look and they say, this is how we see supply, this is how we see demand. And therefore we project. And again, I used to work in the economics group, and that's what we did. We projected, we tried to figure out where are gas prices going to be, where are oil prices going to be. And based on where we think those things are going to be, we make our decisions.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much land is available. Opening up more places to drill doesn't change the economics.
Right.
Right?
I mean, oil companies always always like to have more places to drill. I will say that.
Yeah.
You give them carte blanche to drill wherever they want. They like that because they like to have a lot of options. But that doesn't mean they're going to drill. They're going to look at the economics, and that's going to determine whether they drill.
Right. Like, they will go secure as many of those leases as they can. But it may be 10 years before they do anything with them, because, they want to secure them while they can, because, the future, they don't know how many opportunities they're going to have moving forward to acquire leases and hold on to them. So, if he opens up a bunch of more acreage, yeah, some of it's going to get leased for sure. But that doesn't mean it's going to be drilled on
Right.
anytime during his administration, because
I
they
mean,
will drill on it when, just like you said, when the economics make sense,
right. They'll
not
go
because they
out
have.
and they may do some exploration, they may do some surveys, and they may decide, okay, here's what it looks like, and you're right. It'll take years to assess and decide whether it makes any sense to drill.
So I have a question from, and guys, if I'm missing questions, just let me know. But I have a question from Daria. What do you wish the government would do to support the oil and gas industry to prosper in the United States? Like, what would be a sane one thing as a start to do, other than the genuine insanity they're doing?
I
You got
mean,
any?
for me, I would just say so. The one thing I vehemently disagree with Democrats on is they just treat the oil industry as a hostile industry. The oil industry makes the world go round. I mean, people are able to get around, they're able to travel across the country and around the world, and we treat them as if they are cigarette companies, blowing smoke in everybody's house, and it's insane the way we treat our oil companies. I worked in the Netherlands in 2008, 2009. They're proud of Shell over there. I mean, the Dutch and all the Europeans, they're much more left than we are. They treat their oil companies over there like, these are businesses that are important to our country. And in the US, Democrats act like oil companies are the devil and we cannot get them out of business fast enough. And I get it that there's been, the oil industry overall is conservative. I get that. And they donate money to conservative causes. And I get that. But don't mistake that for, how important this industry is for the United States. I mean, if you want to see people, come to Jesus real quick, if the oil industry just stopped what they're doing tomorrow, society would just cease to function. I mean,
Yeah.
and people don't appreciate that. I was fueling my wife's car up last week, and I just looked around and thought, we all take this for granted. We can pull up and fuel up in 5 minutes, and we've got enough gas to drive another, 350 miles. And we just take that completely for granted. And in the history of mankind, that's just an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, and you're right about the Netherlands. When I went over there, when I worked for Shell, I went over there,
Oh yeah, you
and
work for Shell. I forgot about that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and so there's a plane that leaves Houston every day that is basically almost all Shell employees. Or I don't know if that's still the case, but it was when I was there. um, if you get off the plane in the Netherlands and you have a shirt on like this that has a little Shell pectin on it, you're just walking through. They
Yeah.
don't even stop you at customs. They see that Shell pectin, come on in. And it was funny because I was telling a couple of my coworkers, I was like, "Hey, you might want to have a hat on or a shirt on because they love us over there, and you won't catch any grief in customs if you have something signifying, Well, they didn't, and so I just walk right through, and they're back there for 20 minutes answering questions, and I'm over there hollering at them, just tell them you work for Shell because they do. They love Shell over there, even though their court ruled against them a couple of years ago. But
Right, and they're trying to push electric vehicles, and they're going renewable and all that, but they still realize, even when in 2008, when oil prices hit nearly $150 in the U.S. and gasoline prices over there were like $10 a gallon, the streets were still packed with vehicles, and so they realize, the oil companies are what makes our mobility possible. Um, and somebody said, I don't have a problem with the oil companies. I have a problem with what they do with our political system, with the power. And I get that. They do lobby. They may lobby. And I've always said, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Democrats are hostile to the oil industry. And in turn, the oil industry funnels money into conservative causes and conservative politicians. But it's not helpful for politicians like Gavin Newsom in California to say, the reason you're paying high gas prices is because the oil companies are gouging you. I mean, that's not true. That's not what's happening. And for Jon Stewart the other day, I had to write a Forbes article about this because Jon Stewart said, instead of shutting down places, we should take back the $3 billion in subsidies that were given to the oil industry. That's not real. That's not true. Those are tax deductions, just like you take on your tax return. And I bet you don't think you're getting a subsidy because you get a tax deduction. You're thinking, I'm subsidizing the federal government with my taxes. If they let me keep a little bit of it, they're not subsidizing me. I'm subsidizing them. They just let me subsidize them a little bit less by keeping a little bit more money.
yeah, and people don't understand that oil companies don't set the price for a gallon of gas. If they did, it would still be $5.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay,
I mean, they,
it would still be $5 if oil companies had control. They don't just charge you less or more because they decide to. And I understand that oil companies made record profits. That was the market they were operating in at the time. Sometimes they lose money, sometimes they make hundreds of billions of dollars. That's how
right.
commodities markets work.
Right. I can tell you who's making a lot of money right now. The egg producers that do not have a bird flu problem. They are making enormous amounts of money. And do you think that's because they decided, hey, I'm going to charge $10 a dozen for eggs? No, because that is the market. That's what's happened. They've suddenly shortages, and that is what egg prices are. And so it's the same with oil companies. People have this vision of, I think, of maybe in the boardroom of ExxonMobil, they've got, Shell and Chevron on a conference call, and they're deciding where to charge, what to charge consumers. How much are we going to gouge consumers this week? And it's such a cartoon version of the way things operate. Again, if I had known this, if I had known we were setting oil prices, I could have saved myself a lot of work because we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where our price is going to be and how do we need to operate to best fill the market. That's it. I mean, we're trying to figure out things. We don't have a crystal ball, and we're certainly not setting prices.
Yeah. If I could have set prices, I would have retired from my oil company 3 years ago.
Yep, yep.
uh, so Brian keeps asking about the merchant
I
marine.
know.
Are
I was
you
going to say
familiar?
that. I was going to say that. I don't know. I know the issue. I don't know enough about it to know if getting rid of it. I think it's just protectionism is all that's the only reason we have it there. And I don't know if getting rid of it would help. But I understand that a lot of people want to get rid of it. So, but one of the things, I mean, do you want just anybody hauling gasoline, around the Gulf Coast? Maybe you don't. I don't know. But I don't know enough of that. You may know more about it than I do, but I just know that it was put there for protection reasons to support American jobs and save American jobs. But it has led to higher prices at times.
Yeah. So Nasby says the margin on eggs is nowhere near close to the margin on oil. I know nothing about the margin on eggs, but I know that the margin on oil isn't what you think it is. There are companies right now that struggle at $70, and there's other companies that make a fortune at $70. There is no margin on oil that is specific to basically every company. They all have different corporate structures and cost structures and different contracts. Someone else asked about competition in the oil company space. That competition is not realized at the market. The competition between oil companies is who can get the most land, who can get the best deals on pipelines, midstream, logistics, and delivery. That's how oil companies compete with each other. It's not about price. It's about everything else, right? How do we increase production? How do we acquire more land than our competitor? Oil companies absolutely compete with each other, but they compete over service contracts. They compete over cost. They compete over a lot of things, but they're not really competing on market price because it's a commodity.
Right.
So an
So,
oil company can't go out there and say, "I'm going to sell my stuff $20 a barrel cheaper because I want to compete." That's not how it works.
but let's say they could. So I got a good analogy here because people say that sometimes. Why shouldn't they just go in and undercut everybody else? I'll explain it. Okay. So I have a house. And if over the next 3 or 4 years, the value of my house doubles, I've made a lot of money technically on my house. So now I want to sell my house and I want to sell it. And the realtor says, here's the market. And I've got other houses for sale on my street. And I say, okay, I want to undercut the whole market. I want to sell my house for $100,000 less than what it's worth, than what I think it'll bring. Do you know what would happen? I would have house flippers in here buying my house immediately and raising the price to the market and selling it at the market. That's exactly what would happen.
Yeah,
So if you had somebody go in and undercut the market, you'd have people flood in there, you'd have jobbers flood in there, you'd have people flood in there, buy up all that product and turn around and sell it at the market price. That's what happens. That's why during a hurricane, prices go up so much because you got a guy that goes, I'm not going to get a delivery for 2 weeks, and my fuel tanks have gone down by half today. I have got to jack up my prices, or I'm going to run out of gas.
yeah,
And this is why you don't go, well, I'm going to undercut everybody else, because if you do, your tanks are empty, you're done, you're out of business. You're waiting now until the end of the hurricane and you get your fuel deliveries.
yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that in situations like that, gas stations will raise their prices as a way to ensure more people get some gas,
Yes,
because everyone buys less and more people get it, right?
it's
And
all rationing. You can
yeah,
ration by price, or you can ration by telling people you can only buy 5 gallons of gas, or you can not ration and just let yourself run out.
yeah, because look, someone that owns a gas station isn't going to retire on how much they sell one tank of gas for. You know, like if one shipment of gas is 30, 40 cents a gallon more, they're not going to retire on that. Like that's not a lot of money to them over the life of their business, right? But I do agree that there's some responsibility there to make sure that most people can get gas that need it, especially in an emergency situation. And if that is how they need to do it, then so be it, right? What else was I going to ask you?
Well, somebody said they reduced supply on purpose. Why would they reduce supply on purpose? I mean, like, this is the charge out in California all the time. Oh, this refinery conveniently went down for maintenance. Do you think that serves that refinery to be offline when prices are high? It does not. It serves their competitors. But no, Chevron does not want to take their refinery down when prices are high because that just helps everybody else.
That is unbelievably expensive for them to do that. And that's what I was going to ask you about next. There was recently an article that I made a piece of content about where California is considering buying refineries. I don't know if you saw that.
I did. I did.
I thought it was like it blew my mind when I read it. I thought this is nuts.
That's one of
What
the
do you think?
funniest things I've ever heard. I mean, the state of California trying to manage and operate a refinery. Um, imagine, refining is a boom and bust business. Now, imagine California taxpayers during the bust. These refineries are hemorrhaging money. They're having to do their maintenance. They're having to do, I showed the numbers that like 5 out of 12 months, these refineries lost money in the last year. And the other 7 months, they made money. Sometimes they made good money. And that's when you hear about it. That's when you hear about it. You don't hear about it when they're losing money. But for California, I wish they'd try. I wish they'd try, and I wish it would be very public and transparent. And you know what they'd say? They'd say, "Well, this is a lot harder than we thought." It'd be like Trump. Who knew healthcare was so complicated? Who knew refining was so complicated? That's what they would say. They'd say, we didn't really understand. We didn't really know what we were going into here."
Yeah. Listen, I don't think you could pay me enough money to get in the refining business. Like, yeah, I
So
have
a,
no
a
idea.
guy that I worked for in Hawaii, I worked for a legit billionaire whenever I lived in Hawaii for 5 years. And he thought about buying that refinery on Oahu. And he asked me about it. And I said, listen, I said, you got a lot of money right now. I said, you get in at the wrong time, you may have no money. You get in at the right time, you could make $1 billion, but you get in the wrong time, you may lose $1 billion. So that's what I'm telling you. I would never go and invest that kind of money in something that risky. If it was just a small portion of your net worth and its investment, but it was going to be a large portion of his net worth. He was going to go in and invest a lot of his money. I said, that's a good way to get poor. If you time it wrong, you time it on the down cycle, and a Hawaii refinery in the first place is not a real high margin refinery. They're having to get, expensive crudes from different places. And, the regulations out in Hawaii are super tight. It's hard to do business out there. So I advised him against it. I said, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah, yeah, and I've also told people, sometimes some months like a refinery will be losing money on their gas and making money on their diesel. Like they don't make money on every product.
Right.
Sometimes they lose money on some and make money on others. Sometimes they lose money on everything. Sometimes they make money on everything. And I think it was you one time. Did you use the grocery store analogy with refineries? I think I
Uh,
heard that from you that I've used before. That it's not that different from grocery stores. There's
yeah.
some refineries that make good money, and there's some that don't. Right?
Yeah.
Not they're not all equal.
Right, right. I mean, East Coast refineries were going bankrupt when Midwest refineries were making record profits because they had access to that deeply discounted shale oil at the time when we had a crude oil export ban. So those Midwest refineries were printing money, and you had refineries. You had Trainer Refinery in New Jersey just barely scraping by, and you had refineries going bankrupt.
Yeah. So, what do you think for oil production in 2025? I think so. I think we set another record, but I think it's barely. I think we production is flat. We maybe increased production by 150,000 barrels a day. There was some estimates of 500, 500,000. I don't think we get there. What do you think?
Yeah, it's going to be very close. I mean, for 10 years, I've given predictions in January. This year, I didn't because I said, I just don't know. There's so much uncertainty around the tariffs and we're going to have wildly different economic policies than we've had, in my lifetime. And I just don't know how it's all going to shake out. We're still at record levels. Um, so we may end up setting another record this year. I was confident we would last year. I made that
Yeah.
prediction a year ago, but this year, I think you're right. I think probably we set a small record, but if we come in a little short, I won't be surprised. But we won't set a massive record.
Yeah.
It won't be like the first time Trump was in office where, going back to Obama, we were increasing production 1 million barrels a year, year after year after year after year. And Trump came into office on that. And people don't realize that. They don't realize we had already increased oil production massively under Obama, not because of his policies, because that's when fracking happened. And Trump came into office and fracking was continuing to go. We're reaching a point now where that strong growth phase looks like it's done.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And the only reason that I said I think we'll set another record is because of how strong we're starting.
Yes,
When your first month you book that 13.5 or 6 million barrels a day, your first month, you're already ahead of the curve, right?
right,
So you have to start the more months that go by where you're hitting those numbers, the more you have to lose later in the year to not set the record.
right.
And
That's
that's
why I
why I'm
was
like,
confident a year ago, because year over year in January of 2024, we were so far ahead of January 2023. I said,
yes.
this is a no brainer. We will set a record this year. We could even slide for the entire year and still set a record. But this year, we've had 13 and a half million barrels a day for a number of months. So if we slid very much, we wouldn't set a record. But I don't think we will.
So have you read anything about EURs declining in the Permian? Um, I did a piece on it a while back here, about a month ago. There's a geologist, I can't remember his name. His last name's Berman.
Art
But
Berman. Art Berman.
yeah,
I've been
yeah,
I've,
he
I've hung out with Art before. We're
have you?
friends. Yeah.
Okay. Well, he put out something not too long ago. Uh, EURs on average across the Permian Basin for the last 3 years have declined. And it was very convincing.
Right.
When I was reading this, I didn't know who he was. And so after I read that, I went back and checked him out and researched it.
So Art,
And
in fairness, Art is notoriously bearish about. I mean, if you ask him in 2008, do you think oil production will go up 5 or 6 million barrels a day? He would have laughed in your face,
yeah,
because he is notorious. But he is a smart guy. But he's pretty, he's pretty bearish, and been bearish about the shale boom, he was a big peak oil guy, and that's where I met him. I knew him for years. We both wrote on the oil drum, and we attended the peak oil conference in Austin. And he drove me around Austin, and we got to know each other pretty well. But he's pretty negative about future oil production.
yeah. And today I did a piece there. Are you familiar with Ross Below?
I saw
Uh,
that. I don't know who he is, but I
yeah,
saw I saw your video.
yeah. So he says, Canadian oil sands are dead. 2050 will be at 25 million barrels a day of demand, which is just blows my mind. I there's nothing in my brain that connect those dots. Um,
I haven't been in the oil sands in about 10 years, but when I was there 10 years ago, they were booming. The cost of production was going down and down and down. They were competitive with conventional oil. So yeah, I don't see that happening. I did see your video where you pointed out, we're not sending tar sands down the pipeline. And I don't know, people think this, think we're sending sludge down pipelines. And it's either, as you said, it's upgraded there, or it's extracted and mixed with the diluents to lighten it up and send it down. So that's how it goes down. But we don't put sludge in the pipelines.
yeah, that's not good. It's not good for flow.
Yeah, exactly. Not good for pumps.
I get asked about peak oil all the time, and I just refuse to answer the question because no one's ever gotten it right.
So
Uh,
I started writing for the oil drum many years ago, and I was always a contrarian where I would say, yes, oil's going to peak, but we're not quite there yet. And I would have it out with people. I mean, they would say, yeah, you don't know, you don't realize what's happening in Saudi Arabia, blah blah blah. And I said, I just don't think we're there yet. In fact, the book that I wrote, and it was against my will. It's back here somewhere. Yeah, there it is. That peak oil is in the title, and that was against my will. I told the publisher, I said, I don't want that, because I don't want people to think this is a peak oil book, because it's not. And they said, no, we think peak oil's hot. And this was about 2012, exactly when peak oil was like dead. It was like gone. Fracking was, and everybody forgot about peak oil.
when people ask me about it, what I tell them is I'm not that concerned about it. We'll see it coming 3 or 4 or 5 years before it happens. Like we will clearly see it and be able to see it 3, 4, 5 years before it happens.
See,
That's what I think.
I say it the opposite. We will see it 3 or 4 years after it happens. We will go, okay, okay, that was it. That was it. Because that's why people kept predicting it in 2005. They kept saying, it's here, it's coming. Look, Saudi Arabia is slowing down. And I said, Saudi Arabia is slowing down because they are purposely throttling production. And I said, they can produce oil at that rate for many, many, many more years. And it was true. And Saudi Arabian production today is higher than it was then. And if you polled the people that hung out at the oil drum then, 90% of them would have said, Twilight in the Desert, which is also on my bookshelf. Oh, there it is. That book that made Matt Simmons famous right there was completely wrong. I mean, it was wrong. There was no Twilight in the Desert. Oil in Saudi Arabia wasn't peaking, and he thought it was.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's probably the most common question I get, and I'm just like, no. But you may be right. We may not see it until after it happens.
I think
Um,
if you look back historically, a lot of places, well, I mean, we would have said in the United States by 1975, 1976, oil production has peaked because oil production had fallen for like 5 straight years. And you say, okay, we're headed down. But then, here come the shale boom and boom, it's, we're producing more oil than we've ever produced before. So, um, the guy, Hubbard from Shell, he's the one that came up with the whole Hubbard's curve and the peak
yeah,
oil, and the argument he made was, in order to increase production further in the United States, we'd have to find the equivalent of 8 new giant East Texas oil fields. And what I pointed out is they did find those in the existing fields by increasing the recovery. That's
yeah,
that's where all that oil came from. It came from better technology and increasing productions in existing fields.
yeah. That's exactly right. The first time I ever went to the Permian Basin, I don't remember what year it was. Probably it was in the late '90s, and I went down there to work, and the sort of the broad agreement, at least as I understood, was the Permian Basin was dead, right? It was an old oil field that had it had played out, right, and there was still production there, but its heyday was over, and new technology, new processes, and bam, it's one of the most prolific oil fields in the world again.
It Permian Basin has a history of more than 100 years of production. I always say the Permian Basin is the most impressive oil field or oil basin in the history of the world. I mean, it beats Saudi Arabia's fields. It's produced more oil for longer than anywhere else. So we kind of take for granted because it's in our backyard, but it's incredible.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize, Saudi Arabia, you know, on the grand timeline, that's not a very old field as
Right.
far as production goes. When did they really start pumping oil? Was that in the '70s?
I was
Um,
going to say 50s or 60s. They first
yeah,
started, oil companies first started going in there. But when Gawar, I don't know when it started up, but that's the big one over there.
yeah. But like you said, the Permian was rocking and
20s,
rolling long
1920s.
before Saudi
Yeah.
Arabia was.
Yeah. 1920s, I think Permian started producing.
And they're sitting there today at I think they're close to 6.5 or right around 6.5 million barrels a day coming out of the Permian right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Especially when you look at the size of the basin. I mean, it's a big basin, but when you
It
compare it to
is.
Saudi Arabia, it's small.
Yeah.
What do you think about Anwar? I get asked about Anwar every day.
Um, yeah. Again, oil companies would like the opportunity to explore and drill there. Environmentalists don't want that to happen because they envision an absolute wrecked landscape of oil all over the ground and dead animals, and that's what they think. And ultimately, the oil industry may or may not drill. They may go up there and say, "This is not worthwhile. This is not." It's a tough place to produce and get oil out of there. I mean, if they've got good access to the Alaska pipeline, but there's a lot of special challenges up there. that make it more costlier to produce. And I think if they're going to invest, they've still got a lot to wring out of the Permian Basin and the Bakken and the Eagle Ford. So, you know, there could be, I think the oil companies would vote to allow us to explore and determine what's here. And I think Trump will say, hey, knock yourselves out. You got free reign. And I think environmentalists are going to fight it.
So um, I don't think big oil goes if anybody like big oil. The companies that have enough money to do it are likely more concerned about their brand
Yeah.
than they are chasing that because and the fact that they can invest their dollars in many basins around the world with much not guaranteed but they know they'll make money, right?
Yeah.
Anwar is largely unknown, and I just don't know. It's going to take billions of dollars. You can't go up there and drill one well, right? um, I mean you could, but that's not going to do anything. Probably going to
Right.
have to drill 15 or 20 wells. You know how many wells they had to drill in Prudhoe Bay before they actually found oil? Um, I was reading that once. It was like they drilled quite a few wells before they hit anything that was economically viable.
Well, and today that wouldn't be possible because President Nixon signed off on he cleared out all the red tape and he said we're going to build the Alaska pipeline. And Carter came in and said, hey, let's get this thing going. Let's get the oil coming down it. And during his tenure, oil started flowing down the Alaska pipeline. But it took many years to build it. And today, what would happen was what happened with Keystone. You'd get presidents come in and say, this is not a priority. We're going to move to renewables. And the next one come in and say, speed this up. And then they'd say, slow it down. And people would go, ah, when I worked for ConocoPhillips, we tried to do some projects up there when Sarah Palin was governor, and we could not get a commitment to a long-term tax deal. We have to understand what our taxes are going to be, and she wouldn't commit to that. And we're like, okay, we're walking away because, we're not trying to be greedy. We're trying to understand what our economics look like, and we cannot understand what our economics look like if you cannot commit in writing to this is your tax structure. Otherwise, we can't evaluate this project.
Yeah, and if you look at the Alaska pipeline today, I think it's running at about 15% maybe capacity.
Yeah, it's low. I
Um,
don't know what it is exactly, but yeah, it's
I,
low.
I I think it's about I think it's a 2 million barrel a day capacity.
Yeah,
It's a high capacity pipeline, and I think it's 200 and something thousand barrels a day going through it. So it may not even be 15%.
yeah.
Um, what about the Kitimat LNG? So, we're talking about capturing all that natural gas from Prudhoe Bay that they re-inject back into the ground, building a pipeline, LNG export terminal in Kitimat. Have you read about that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So for years, our only LNG export terminal in the United States was up there in Alaska. And I think we were exporting, and it was ConocoPhillips. So we were exporting down to Japan mostly. Um, I'm all for increasing LNG. The biggest problem in the world with rising carbon emissions is coal. And if we can get LNG into places that will shut coal plants down, and if they'll shut those coal plants down and build nuclear plants and natural gas, and of course, put all the wind and solar in you want, do that, but you're not going to shut down a coal-fired power plant and replace it with a wind farm. Shut down the coal plant, put a nuclear plant in, or shut down the coal plant and put LNG in. That will enormously help carbon emissions. I don't know if people realize it, but the United States has the largest decline in carbon emissions of any country over the last 15 years. And the reason is we've displaced coal with natural gas, and we need to be exporting that all over the world. I understand that natural gas is a fossil fuel, but it has half the emissions of coal when producing power. So, it is a good transition. And the best transition would be to go straight to nuclear power. But, a lot of countries are still, allergic to that. So, LNG is a good alternative.
So, have you seen any of my content about all of the LNG projects we have planned? And do you think we can keep up with that? So, with what we have planned, um, that would be about 12 trillion cubic feet a year going out of the country, which is about 3 times what we export now. And I'm over here asking myself, can we produce that much natural gas and keep prices reasonable in the United States with all of those exports?
Well, there'll be a time, and I don't know where it is, but there will be a time that natural gas, production will turn over and start down. It flattened out last year. Of course, prices were low last year. Um, I don't know that. I think all those projects will not get built. I mean, people go out and they float projects, and sometimes they don't even have the money, and they're trying to attract money, and a lot of those projects won't get built. So, um, how much more can we expand natural gas production? Um, about the time I was hanging out with Art Berman, I talked to a geologist from Colorado, and he was talking about natural gas. And he told me, he said, "You have no idea what's coming." And I said, "Well, tell me." And he said, "We have so much natural gas, you cannot dream of how much we're going to increase natural gas production." And I was very skeptical, but I filed that away. And I said, "Okay, we'll see." And since then, natural gas production is up by 90% or so. So the guy was right. How much further can it go? I don't know, but I do know we do have a lot of natural gas.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a ton. We have a ton. Have you paid much attention to utility bills lately?
Um, yeah, a little. And I saw somebody complaining the other day at me on Blue Sky about PG&E and their utility bill out in California, and um, so yeah, I mean,
So people send me their
oh,
utility bills every day. People are paying more for delivery charges than they are
yeah,
for their gas
yeah,
they're using. Um, and with all of the LNG exports coming, and we've been slowing down natural gas production because we just went through a pretty bad period of gas prices. Natural gas was around a buck 50
right,
not that long ago. It's over $4 now. So we are not meeting. I hate to say it this way. We're not really meeting natural gas demand right now when you couple that with exports.
right.
Do you have any? Have you looked at any of this at all with people's utility bills? Because I think things like that can cause a lot of kickback and anger around the country. And I personally, I think utility companies are taking advantage of people.
Well, so a lot of people ask me, won't this LNG, won't that raise my gas bill? I said, yes, it probably will. But if not for that, the gas companies are not going to drill, and they're not. I mean, they're drilling because they feel like there's a market there. I can produce more. So it's what's more important to you? What I mean, and I guess for most people, the most important thing is I want cheap gas, but cheap gas leads to lower drilling and eventually leads to expensive gas. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, the LNG. If you took the LNG off the table right now, if you shut down LNG exports tomorrow, gas prices would absolutely plunge to zero. We'd have more gas than we know what to do with, and but then drilling would completely shut down if we couldn't export LNG.
yeah. That's what Robert Bryce says. The cure for cheap prices is cheap prices,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Um, but I think where the end user, the customer, they're getting hit right now. I think these utility companies, they're passing their costs on to them for their renewable energy. And then at the same time, they're having to pay for, a little bit higher natural gas cost. And I think they're just beating them over the head right now because they can.
yeah.
That's
Well, so
what I think's
somebody
going on.
somebody yesterday was complaining about PG&E out in California, and so I looked up their financials, and they said, the company made $2 billion last year, and they've raised our rates 35%. And I looked up, and their net margin was about 10%. And I said, well, what do you think they should make? And they didn't answer that. But I mean, it all comes down to how much money should a company make? Should a company be able to make?
Mhm.
And in the case of PG&E, they're a regulated utility, so they have to go to the regulators and they have to say, here's what we're proposing to charge, and here's why. Here's the structure, and the regulators have to look at that. And California is a very democratic state, and they've got democratic regulators, and they have to convince them, look, this is, we're going to have to bury lines underground, and, with wildfire risk and everything. And this is how much it's going to cost. And that's why the rates have gone up out there. But I would say their margins, at look at 10.3% margin on their, company was not that excessive.
Yeah, 10% is not terrible. And I was researching this last night. If you look at Massachusetts, Connecticut, I think New York was in there, Michigan's in there. Uh, the states with that are currently having the highest utility bills, or people are sending me pictures of their $1,200, $1,300 electric bills, or these are all unregulated states.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, the unregulated states sit at the top. If you Google highest utility rates, in the country, and you look at every one of those states, they're all unregulated.
Yeah, you know what my bill is? My bill is not much because I've got a nuclear plant sitting right outside the city here, and so my bills have never been excessive. Even in Phoenix here, where it could be 120 degrees outside, in Texas I would have $400 or $500 electric bill, and here I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, ours isn't bad at all here. Not at all. Probably 300 at the most. Um, but I do have a pretty energy efficient home, which that helps a lot.
Yeah,
I tell people that are trying to save money, um, don't focus on energy efficient appliances. Focus on making your home energy efficient, and focus on the other stuff later, because it doesn't matter how efficient an appliance is if it's sitting in something that's not efficient,
yeah.
right? Start at the outside, work your way in. What else we got? Any questions? Anybody want to ask Robert questions? In the, I do this every day, Robert, and I think this is I think this is the third time that I've interviewed you, and I think you've interviewed me twice
Yep.
on the Energy Mix. Do you still do that? Are you
Yep, yep.
still?
In fact, I just did an interview. So I'm either the host or I'm being interviewed. Like once a month I'm interviewed, and once a month I do an interview. I was interviewed just about an hour before this interview, and then tomorrow I interview a guy on nuclear power and how that's going to go under the Trump administration. So that interview's tomorrow. I did tell Kim we need to get you back on, and lot to talk about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I currently have a couple of interviews that I do one every month. It's just scheduled, like, you know. But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So what is tell us about the nuclear.
So I get these promos all the time. People want to be featured in Forbes, so I'll get a promo, and it says, with President Trump in office, what does that mean for nuclear power? How will his policies impact nuclear power in the United States over the next 4 years? Now, normally I look at these and I just flush them, and this time I said, that could be interesting. So I talked to the guy, and you know how my format is. I gave him a list of questions, and I said, this is what I would like to talk about. Will that work? And he said, yes, that will work. So we're going to do that tomorrow. And I think that will be broadcast not this weekend, but the next weekend.
Awesome. Well, I won't send you a promo, but anytime you want to feature me, go ahead and do it.
All right, I'll do that.
Oh man. Well, Robert, it's been an hour and 15 minutes, so our time's about up. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I like coming on here. I like talking to people about energy, and it's been my passion for a very long time. And I always appreciate the opportunity to correct misconceptions. That's mostly what I do on Forbes. Somebody says something, and I say, nope, that's not the way it is. Here's the way it is. And I spend a lot of my time doing that.
And you catch a lot of grief, don't you?
Oh, I catch grief from both sides. I mean, after Elon Musk bought Twitter, I wrote an article and I said he is antagonizing the very people who are Tesla customers. And I said, this is going to cost him market share. You should have
Yes.
seen the grief I got from his fanboys who
I read
said,
that article.
you don't know what you're talking about. You have, and I said in the article, I said, look, this is going to take some time because there are already many orders in the pipeline and there's not a lot of competition. But I said, over time, this is going to be a factor. And I had people say, this is stupid. And one guy, 3 months later, mind you, I said, this is going to take time. 3 months later, he said, well, this age like sour goat milk or something, like warm goat milk. And I'm like, it's going to take a little time. But now, Tesla's deliveries were down double digits last year, and they're boycotting them all over Europe. They're down, 50, 60% in places. And I got a lot of grief from his fans there. I get grief from the left whenever I criticize things about, stuff like Gavin Newsom saying, they're being gouged, or this is greed, or inflation is being driven by greed. And when I actually address that, I get grief from the left, and I get grief from the right when I said, nope, Trump cannot do that. He didn't do this. He didn't refill the SPR the first time he was in office, like he said, and then the right will come after me. So, all I'm trying to do is tell the truth, and very occasionally I will get it wrong, but not very often. Usually I'm satisfied, looking back at what I wrote. I've said that was correct.
Yeah, I remember that article, and I remember reading it, and because like that had not occurred to me at all.
It hadn't
But
occurred to
when I
hardly
read,
anybody. So that's the funny thing.
yeah,
Looking back, you go, well, that's obvious. But no, in the moment, people thought
yeah,
that's silly. And I said, no, the people who are going to buy a Tesla are liberals in California. That is your Tesla market. And you are antagonizing those people, and they are going to back away. And so first the stickers started, the bumper stickers. I bought this before Elon went crazy, but then people, just stopped buying Teslas. The market has fallen, and people say, oh, that's because the market overall was soft. No, the EV market grew last year. Tesla deliveries fell. So that is a function of Tesla and Elon's toxicity to the brand.
yeah. I when I read that article, when I finished it, I was 100% on board. I was like, yeah, he's right. But it was something that I just hadn't thought about before I read your article. It was a good article. And I've seen you, you post a lot of your stuff on LinkedIn. Um, it's not too bad on LinkedIn, right? The
Yeah,
trolls
no,
aren't too
LinkedIn
bad.
is not a troll farm, but X became unbearable. I put on there inactive, so I don't post on X anymore. It just got unbearable.
Yeah.
Facebook is becoming absolutely toxic now. They're just rotating these memes to see, what I'll bite on. Either one day it's this is the greatest time in the history of mankind, and then the next meme will be we're descending into chaos. I mean, like they'll just rotate to see, will I bite on something? Um, and they throw the most random stuff at me. Yesterday, I had join crow lovers group. Like maybe this guy is a potential crow lover. Let's see if he, I'm like, where are you coming up with this? And I'll say, not interested, not interested, not interested, and they keep on just throwing that stuff out there. And somebody mentioned idiocracy earlier, and it seems like that. It seems like they're trying to rush us into idiocracy as fast as they can.
Oh, I know it. I know it. And people ask me, they're like, Matt, how is it you don't have more followers? Like, because for whatever reason, people think I should have millions of followers. And I'm like, when you piss everyone off, it's hard to get a lot of followers.
No, Robert Bryce told me years ago. He said, if you consistently pick a lane and stick there, you could have a presence on one of the news networks. And I said,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
not. I said that's not what I want. And I've had people tell me that before. They said you could be on Fox News all the time if you just consistently stick with one side. And I said, but that's not. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in being on TV for that purpose. That is not what I'm about. I'm just. I want to try to correct misconceptions and tell the truth.
Yeah, I had an agent. I can't remember her name. Some lady from New York. She emailed me and she wanted to represent me, but basically that's what she told me. She said, "I've been watching your content. If you will, and she wanted me on Fox News.
Yeah,
All of her clients appear on Fox. What is it? News OAN or whatever,
yeah,
Newsmax.
yeah,
All
yeah.
of the super conservative. That's
That's
where
where the
all of her
money
clients.
seems to be. And
Yeah.
Sean Hannity has had a graphic of me up on Fox, and he misrepresented what I said. And it was absolutely false. What he said, he used it to say Trump reduced emissions, and he used a quote of mine from Forbes and quoted me. He's got my name there behind the quote, and it was from when Obama was in office. So he misrepresented, and that's I can't I get conservative media coming to me sometimes, and they would like for me to confirm a certain narrative, and I won't do that. I'll say, well, look, okay, this is correct, but you need to understand context. But then they often just forget the context and they want the quote. They want to say, oh, Robert Rapier said this, um, without me saying, yeah, but it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that that, a lot of times those people that go in those programs are saying what they're told to say.
Yeah.
And now I'll pass. I've spent, I don't know, 4 years sort of building my social media brand, however you want to. Am I supposed to just tell all those people, yeah, that was all bullshit? I'm going to sell out and go make money on right wing media? No,
Yeah.
no, that's not a thing.
After I was on 60 Minutes, I had an opportunity there to sort of springboard that. And I said, "This is I don't like doing this. I don't like being expected to go down a single lane all the time. I would rather just be on my own." And I've been on TV a lot of times since then, but I will tell them, and I've had people say no to me because I said this is what I'm going to say, and I said, yeah, that's not what we want to hear. So we'll find somebody else to say what we want them to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining me today. I got to take my kid to get his retainer
All right,
that he'll probably lose before we even get home. So,
kids, yeah,
because he's 10.
yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. Just holler at me if you ever want me to come back on the Energy Mix.
All right, I will. We'll. I need a guest every month, and you're a good guest. So, you know, we'll have you back on. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah. And everyone, if you got in late, you can watch this entire thing on YouTube. They automatically post it once it's over, and you can watch it just like any other piece of content. So if y'all missed some of it, go back and watch. If you have any questions that we didn't get to, put it in the comments section. I try to hit those as well. Robert, thank you so much. I hope you
Yep.
have a great weekend and best of luck to you moving forward.
Y-
And I'll see you soon, man.
Yep. And I am on TikTok for people who, thanks people for showing up. I'm not on YouTube. I may come to YouTube. There's some videos of me on YouTube, but I don't have a channel. But maybe that's the future. Yeah. Yeah.
People that are just, I call it
Yeah.
content dumping. To try to build a following. I know a guy that puts like 30 videos a day
Yeah.
on YouTube. I have no idea how he does it. I'm like, how do you
Yeah.
do that? Like, I'm lucky if I can get two. It is almost
Yeah.
impossible to build a following on YouTube, but I'm trying. I'm trying anyway. So
All right.
thanks a lot, man.
All right. We'll see you. Take care.
See you,
Thanks,
buddy.
everybody.